Hey YouTube, I'm Jimmy. In this video, I'm walking through creating an ETF dividend portfolio for anyone who wants great dividends. ETF is short for Exchange Traded Funds. So, in my last video called An Investment Portfolio for Beginners, I talked about the ETFs that I would include to build a solid portfolio. The goal there was to focus on high quality companies, safety, diversification, and some growth. In this video, I'm looking for the very same thing, except instead of growth, I'm looking for high quality dividends. Now I'm creating two different ETF dividend portfolios in two different videos. Today's video is going to focus on a stable dividend portfolio made up of ETFs. Once again, I'm after quality and diversification and will likely end up with a reasonable dividend yield of about 3.5%. Then in our next video, we're going to go after more yield. Once again, we're going to need diversification because of all the benefits that diversification brings to the table. But because we'll be targeting close to, let's say, a 6% dividend yield for that portfolio, well, we're likely going to have to find more specialized ETFs, and we're probably going to have to pay higher dividend ETF fees because of it. But I expect our diversification to help stabilize that portfolio. Now, for both of these videos, I'm going to do the same thing that I did in the beginner video, and that is I'm going to focus on using a satellite portfolio. And a satellite portfolio, just so we're all on the same page, the idea behind it is that you have a core group of holdings, and then each of us select our satellite positions to go around our core holdings. Perhaps those satellite positions are designed to get more dividends, or more stability, or more growth, or more safety, or whatever it might be. I'll throw out my 2 cents for what could be added to each of the portfolios from a satellite perspective. Okay, so let's get started. So we'll call this portfolio our long-term dividend ETF portfolio. Again, our goal is to find our core set of holdings, and then we'll talk satellite positions after that. So my first core dividend ETF is the ProShares S&P 500 Dividend Aristocrats ETF, ticker symbol NOBL. NOBL has a fee of 35 basis points. They have about 53 holdings, and their dividend yield is about 2.4%. Now, this ETF focuses on the S&P 500 companies that have consistently paid and increased dividends for many, many years. So you end up with core holdings like Coca-Cola, Becton Dickinson, and Aflac, companies like that. Okay, now, before we get into the weightings, how we would weigh that, we're going to go through each of the companies first. Okay, on to the next company. So for our next holding, I'm looking at the Oppenheimer Ultra Dividend Revenue ETF, ticker symbol RDIV. RDIV has a fee of 39 basis points. They have about 60 holdings, and they have a dividend yield of about 4%. Now, the goal of this ETF is to invest in companies with low dividend payout ratios, meaning that they have plenty of room for the dividends that they do pay, maybe even some room to increase them. Now, the tricky part to building this type of portfolio is not to duplicate too many of the underlying holdings. I didn't want to pick 4 or 5 ETFs that all invest in the same companies. Well, if we're going to do that, well, we might as well just pick one good ETF. So I was careful not to have our underlyings overlap too much. That being said, these two ETFs only have 3 holdings that I saw that overlap. They both have Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Consolidated Energy. But luckily for us, this won't matter too much since these holdings will just be a fraction of our entire portfolio. Okay, on to our next holding. The next holding adds some stability to our portfolio, and it has a nice yield. It's Vanguard's Long-Term Bond ETF, ticker symbol BLV. BLV has a fee of just 7 basis points. It holds over 2,000 different bonds, so clearly it's well diversified. It invests in corporate bonds and government bonds, and it's got a ton of different ones. And BLV has a dividend yield of about 4%, so it adds a decent amount of dividend to our portfolio. Okay, our last holding in our dividend ETF portfolio is the S&P International Dividend ETF, ticker symbol DWX. DWX has a fee of 45 basis points. It has over 100 holdings, and it has a dividend yield close to 5%. This ETF has holdings like the National Australia Bank and Singapore Telecommunications. So clearly, this is a nice diversifier to our other core holdings. Now, as far as the weightings go, here's how I would weight these 4 core holdings. I would do 35% NOBL and 35% RDIV. I really like these two dividend ETFs. They have solid companies in them. They're likely to be around for a long time and consistently pay out reliable dividends. Then I would weigh both BLV and DWX with 15%. Once again, they're solid diversifiers, and when we combine them into this portfolio, they give us our target dividend yield of about 3.5%. Now we have our core holdings. What about our satellite holdings? Well, in our last video, I picked individual companies that I thought would complement that portfolio. And I believe that many of those companies would do a good job of complementing this portfolio as well. Now, those were companies like AT&T, Home Depot, Microsoft. Boeing was brought out in the comments. In that video, I also mentioned Chevron. I'd probably avoid Chevron because that's in 2 of the ETFs, so no reason to triple dip. But the list goes on and on as far as companies that could be added. In our Dow 30 analysis, where we're analyzing all 30 companies in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, we hit on a whole bunch of different companies. So if you're looking for individual names, that might be a pretty good place to start if you're interested as to how we did our research. Now, I also think it makes sense to complement this portfolio with additional ETFs. So in looking for some additional ETFs, I looked at something like Alerian's MLP, ticker symbol AMLP. They have a dividend yield of right around 8%. Sure, they're a very volatile ETF, but that dividend could add a nice boost. They focus on energy, so if we're okay with the additional energy exposure, they might be a good addition. Another good addition could be the Mid-Cap ETF that I brought out in the last video. Their ticker symbol is IJK, and IJK is a mid-cap growth ETF, and if the goal is to pick up a little bit of dividends but really target growth, that ETF could be the way to go. That ETF has a dividend yield of slightly over 1%. Another interesting holding would be the iShares US Preferred Stock ETF, ticker symbol PFF. They invest in US preferred stock and they have a dividend yield of more than 6%. That could make a great addition to this portfolio from both a dividend standpoint and from a diversifier standpoint, since we don't have any preferreds in any of the other stuff that we own. But, like I said, another possibility, pick individual stocks, and you could go to our Dow 30 analysis for some of those. And this brings me to one final point. Let's say that you're just starting out investing and you don't have quite enough money to get started when it comes to putting together an entire portfolio, but you want to get started as soon as possible. Well, here's how I would do it. What I would do is I would gradually build up to get to whatever your version of a portfolio like this would be. For me, instead of waiting until I have all the money to buy all the shares I need to properly weight the portfolio, well, I would instead buy them one share at a time if necessary. I would buy them in a specific order. So for me, I would start with either RDIV or NOBL. RDIV is a bit more of an aggressive ETF, but it's got a better yield. So if that works for you, that might be a good place to start. NOBL has larger companies and is a bit more stable, but it's got a lower yield. So it would really be a preference thing, but I would start with one of those too. If dividends are most important, start with RDIV. If it's stability you care about, start with NOBL. And then as soon as you have the one, once you're able to, get the second one. And then I would move right down the line. I would buy BLV third, and I would be doing DWX fourth. And just keep adding to the portfolio until you're happy with the size of the portfolio. And not until you're happy with the size and you get the weightings where you're happy with them, well, then I would consider adding satellite positions, but not until you get your core portfolio in place. So let me ask you, how would you build your portfolio? Would you do it the same way? Would you prefer to build it one share at a time? Or would you rather save up enough cash and then launch the entire portfolio all at once? If you did it that way, you'd pay less commission charges, so there's something to be said about that. What about your satellite holdings? What companies would you add, or what ETFs would you add? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button. And thank you for sticking with me all the way to the end of the video. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.